thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Butchester. You know what I like to do on my show. I want to enlighten you. I want to inspire you. I want to empower you to become your best self. Now, Scripture reminds us that the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And today we want to get you fired up about finding hope and meaning out of adversities. My guest today is JOAN GREEN, and we're talking about her book, Resilience, Memoirs of JOAN GREEN. So, you know what I'm going to tell you to do. Go on, get comfy, get cozy, get your coffee or get your tea, because we are about to get started. Good morning, Joan. Thank you so much for joining me on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela today.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Angela. Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, before we talk about your book, as is the tradition here on the show, we always give our authors an opportunity to kind of introduce themselves to our listening audience. So, we know that you are an author and that you have a passion for that. But what else makes you you?
Well, today I'm retired. I'm a widow, and I have 5 children. And as a child, I knew that God just loved me. And at the age of 10, my father gave me a Bible after he asked me what would I like in town while I was ill. And that Bible has gone with me throughout my life. So I think that's the grounding of what makes me who I am.
Absolutely. I love that. And I always ask, to get a little bit from each author, because I think who you are really is established as a young person. People can kind of pinpoint those people that are going to go on and work, for example, in ministry. There's just something about that folks go, yep, that one is definitely going to continue to share the love of God. So I love it. I love it. Now, being an author, is that something that you always wanted to do, or did you find that that was just the next step along your life path?
Well, it's the next step along my life path. I was asked many years ago to write my story, and I didn't do it. So eventually, I did decide to put it down on paper, and that's where this book has come from.
Absolutely. Now, I love the title of your book. How did you come about the title? Explain that to us.
Resilience. It came from. I just learned so much about writing my book. I didn't have a title when I wrote it. I waited. It was right at the end. I decided, hey, what is it about my journey that has got me through? And it was the chance of every situation I was able to come through the other side with, and I learned something from it, and I was able to share something about those incidences. And I just think, what goes with that? And it was resilience.
I love it. I love it because, I think that the majority of us, we've had to draw on some form of resilience in one form or another. If you lived for any, quite a number of years or so, there's been something that has really required for you to dig deep and to really hold on for the bumpy ride. So I love it. I love it. Now, when you were writing, did you find that you had a particular audience in your head? For example, many of the authors that I have on, their books are appropriate for teenagers or even those that might be in middle school with the lessons that they're trying to teach. Others say, nah, I think you need to be probably a more mature person, perhaps someone over 30 or someone with kids, so on and so forth. Do you have a particular reader in mind when you were writing, or did you find that this story is kind of a read for all ages?
Well, at the time, I just thought it was getting the message out there, but I realised over the time I've listened to people who have read my book, and that it goes from the ages of 20 to, not in their 90s. So, and each person has got something from it, or they wanted another copy to share with somebody else. And I found that was quite empowering. It wasn't just for women, it was for men as well.
Yes, because that was my next question. Would it be appropriate for me to read as well? So thank you so much for answering that question. Now, when reading the book, how do you suggest that someone read it? Should it be cover to cover, chapter by chapter, or kind of smaller doses, like how we would read a devotional? What's your suggestion there?
Well, it's interesting. I've heard that people have read it right through and couldn't put it down. There were different chapters that were relevant. The chapters are in the book. I've looking at my teenage years and about when reality hits. I talk about having an illness and how I got through that on the other side. I talk about being kind to myself during that process.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, did you have a particular thing that inspired you to get to writing? I know for many people, there's that epiphany moment where they realize, you know what, I need to put this down, so that others will be able to learn from these lessons. Others will say, well, I've been writing for a number of years, but it was this one thing where I decided to gather the stories together and put them in a book form. Did you have any particular motivation or inspiration that said, yep, now's the time?
Yes, I did.
So, Joan, my next question for you is about choosing which experiences that you wanted to include in your story. Since this is a book of memoir, how did you determine which stories you would include, or better yet, how did you determine which stories to exclude?
Well, when I started thought about writing the book, it actually came out of somebody saying to me after my husband died by suicide that many years later she said to me, I didn't believe you, and as a group they didn't believe what was going on in my world. And I thought, well, if they don't believe me as an adult, how can a person be believed as a child? So that I started getting down to business by putting things together and looking at what through my life, and there seemed to be a process or a theme to get to where I was at that time. And I thought if the things that helped me during that time, and if I shared those things, maybe it can help somebody else. And that was what was behind me writing it, the thing, and the way I wrote the book.
Now, when you were going through your lived experiences, did you have someone to help you during that time?
Well, that was interesting because often when I've gone through experiences, I didn't know anyone had been through the same experiences. And as a Christian, I found that was really a hard thing. And that was only until my husband had died by suicide, I had somebody who also had been through the same similar situation, who came to share and just stood by me. And every time I made a phone call to her, we would meet for coffee. And so that was a real energy thing to help me through that process. So that was the person that I had to help me through that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, do you remember what was one of the most inspiring things that you learned about yourself, perhaps when you were writing? Did you have any self-realizations?
I think the thing that really struck me right through the whole process is it was my grounding in knowing that the love of Jesus in my early years, and how that Bible that was the one thing that was the thing that held me in good stead, and having that relationship with Jesus through the process. And I think keeping close to God has been the catalyst for me to get the energy to continue going on and making a difference.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Joan, it is almost time for us to go to break, but before we do, can you please remind everyone what is the title of your book, where can we get a copy, and how do we stay in contact with you?
Thank you. Now, my book's name is Resilience, and it's obtained on Amazon. You can stay in contact with me by looking at the website, authorjoan.com. The book's available in Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Alrighty, everyone. Now you know where you can get a copy of the book. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Butchester. My guest today is Joan Green, and we are talking about her book, Resilience. So my next question for you, Joan, is when you were writing, did you find that you needed a particular time of day where you felt that you were the most creative when it came to the process of putting the book together? Or did you need a particular environment in order to really feel as though, I'm not being interrupted or disturbed? I really want to dedicate this time to the creative process.
I would go with my notepaper and pen, and I would find myself a place, and usually near the water, sometimes near the ocean, and sit there and just listen to the waves in the background while I was able to write. Or I would go where there was some bush around where the birds were singing and spend that time there, and I'd be creative. And the writing, putting it down on paper would be done at home, and usually at the early hours of the morning. I found that was the best time.
And I love asking that question because I find that everyone has their own unique rhythm. They have their own time that they need, their own place that they need. But I find that people find encouragement through that because someone eventually says, the ideal location for you, I am a beach baby. So if I'm able to be anywhere near any body of water, it is refreshing for me, and it really helps me be creative. So I can definitely understand that. Now, for so many of the authors that I talk to, their goal is not just to write one book, but to be, I'm going to say, a full-time author, in that there are other ideas that are floating around with them. How have you found, how have you been able to function as an author, considering you also have other books that you've written?
I'm actually at the moment re-looking at the first book I'd written, called Bridging the Gap. I want to republish that. That was published about 20 years ago, a couple of years after my husband died. I've been a widow now for 21 years, so I thought it was time to re-look at that and have that republished.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you are thinking about doing that, because that means that it will be reintroduced to the people that perhaps wouldn't have found it before, but now you'll be able to revamp it and be able to introduce it to a new group. I like that.
Yeah.
Now, when you were going through the process of putting the book together, did you find that there were any pros or cons to the way in which you put it together? So let me ask that a different way. Some authors choose to self-publish, others choose to use a house or a publishing company to get their book out. Which way did you decide to go, and what were some good things? What were some things that you weren't expecting?
I decided to self-publish. I looked for a publisher, and I had a conversation with them, and that's what. And I found one that understood, I guess, the Christian aspect of my book, and I wanted. I found that was really. I accepted that. It was really comforting to know that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that it is important that someone understand your faith perspective when you're doing something that really is about you personally, because then they're on the same wavelength. I can understand that. Now, speaking of faith, since we are Faith Talk Radio, do you think that your faith has helped you get through some of the ups and downs that you've had just in life in general? I'm not talking about any one thing in particular, but do you think that your faith has gotten you through just your day-to-day living?
Oh, definitely, got me through, and I remember I went to Bible college just 2 years before my husband died, and I remember the person who interviewed me saying to me about Esther 4:14, yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom at such a time as this. And I didn't know that my husband would die by suicide two years later, and at the end of my second year. So I thought, yes, this experience is something that happened in my life, and I learned so many things about that, and the fact that there wasn't anybody else out there at the time. I couldn't get counselling. There was nothing for the families, and that was really surprising to me. And that my passion was to try to make a difference in that area of that part of my journey as well. And I know God was with me every step of the way. It was I had no doubt in the world about that one.
And it's so interesting that you say that, because we do not know. We really and truly just do not know where we are going to be from day to day, considering year to year. So it's like, oh my goodness, that is an amazing story. I'm so glad that I asked that. Now, when you, even though I know that you've written a book prior to, but with this book, when you were done, you've put it all together, you've chosen the cover, everything has been published, and you're now holding your finished work in your hands. How did you feel in that moment?
Oh, that was just an amazing feeling. It was like, and looking at the book and knowing that writing it down and being able to help some other people, I found it very cathartic for myself, and it actually showed me a lot about how I dealt with things along the way, and how my faith has been a part of that journey, and it was good. It was really amazing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, for so many people, when we think about success, we tend to kind of put things with that, right? Someone lives in a really big home, they're driving a fancy car or an import or something like that, or they have a lot of flashy jewelry. There's something that we think, and it tends to be a material thing. But when we talk to authors, many times being a successful author, though it may include a big house or a fancy car, that isn't necessarily their definition of what it means to be successful as an author. What does a successful author look like, sound like, or what does that mean to you?
To be successful as an author, what it means to me is, if my book can help one other person, one other family, one other group of people, and to have understanding about other people's situations, and thinking if it would just give some insight on how that to me is a success. That's all I want, is to share that and to help others. That was my hope.
I tend to ask that question a lot, because I know that each person has their own understanding of what it means. But I've shared my own little story there, and I remember being a young person thinking that when someone said, if I could just help one person, and I kept going, what do they mean by that? Like, do they really mean if they could help one person? Like, they went through a lot of work just to help one person. What does that mean? And it wasn't until, of course, I became an adult myself and got into this particular line of work that you say, it's true. If just one person has that aha moment, has that epiphany, or has some form of revelation, it's true. It's like, it was worth it. And it really and truly is true. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Now, if there's someone out there that's going through their own particular something, and they need to pull on this word resilience, they need to find their way. Do you have any bit of advice for them or words of encouragement for them to let them know to keep moving forward?
And I find that have a friend that you can talk to. If you don't find someone who understands or has been through what you've been through, talk to a counsellor or find a support group. A support group, one of the things in my book is about chronic fatigue syndrome. I had 18 months in bed at one time in my life. And I found once I had a diagnosis, I went to a support group. And listening to other people in that support group, we get some insight about what could help me. And then we would all be laughing by the end of it and then go home feel energized to keep going with the health issue. And I can only, that's my biggest thing is to find that support group. And as a Christian, it may not be in the church. It could be out in the community, like the hospital has a support group. But so there's other ways of, getting that continued support and strengthening us and to get through to the other side of it and learning things along the way. And as we share, that's when we help somebody else. We share what's happening. This works. I've done this and this worked for me. And then someone in the group will say, or later on they might remember, that helps so-and-so. And then it just says continues up, spirals up to giving people energy. So that's,
You are so right there. You are absolutely right, because I find that sometimes one of the best things that I can do when I'm not operating as a therapist, but one of the best things that I can do is be a really great listening ear for my friends, and just say, just be there, not to give any advice, not to be their therapist or anything like that, but just to sit and listen and give them that safe place for them to know there's no judgment here. I just love you. I just want you to know that I'm here. So that is so good. I love that advice. Love it, love it. Well, I know that I have enjoyed my time with you today, Joan, but I want to give you an opportunity just one last time before I let you go. Please remind everyone of the name of your book, the title of your book, where can we get a copy, and of course, if someone wants to reach out to you, how should they do that?
Okay. My name is JOAN GREEN, and my title of my book is Resilience. You can get a copy on Amazon, and if you'd like to stay in contact with me, it's authorjoan.com. Thank you.
Thank you again for being on Daily Sparks with Dr. Angela. And listeners, thank you as well for spending time with us today. As always, may the Lord continue to shine His face upon you. May you receive His grace and His mercy in all that you do. Until next time, everyone, remember that you are blessed in the Lord. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Butchester. You know what I like to do on my show. I want to enlighten you. I want to inspire you. I want to empower you to become your best self. Now, Scripture, it reminds us that the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And today we want you on fire about the book, Musings of a Traveler Headed Home. Its author is Thomas Young. Now, you know what I'm going to tell you to do. Go on. Let's get comfy, get cozy, get your coffee or get your tea, because we are about to get started. Good morning, Thomas. Thank you so much for joining me here on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
Well, hello.
I'm so glad that you are here, and I can't wait to talk to you about your book. But first, as is tradition here on the show, we always give our authors an opportunity to introduce themselves to the few people out there that may be unfamiliar with you or your work. So first question is, what makes Thomas Thomas? What makes you you?
Well, actually, I grew up in Michigan, and I've traveled all over the U.S. and now in Oklahoma. Basically, I started writing because my grandfather, way back when, he typed his own individual poems on an old typewriter, and he never published them. So that got me thinking, and so I started just writing, and the first class I went in and they said, what are you guys doing here? You should be writing. So the professor just sat back while we wrote, and then I learned some things here and there, and so here's my third book.
Now, being an author, is that something that you always wanted to do, or did you find that life simply presented the perfect timing for the first book?
Well, the first book was poetry, back in 95, Christian poetry. And, I mean, I've always enjoyed looking outside the box. I enjoy just kind of viewing things the way that they are if I can. And so I just put together a bunch of poems, and some of it was like E.E. Cummings, who wrote all over the map, and the publisher had a horrible time trying to typeset it. But anyway, after that, then I ended up hiking the Pacific Crest Trail from Mexico to Canada. And then the spiritual trail happened, and I ended up writing a book called Going Home, A Backpacker's Journey. And an impossible picture was planted on that book, which you'd have to get the book to find out. And so now I've just got musings and various sundry items, and so there it is.
Sure. Now, Thomas, the title of your book, Musings of a Traveler Headed Home, how did you determine that that would be the title of this book?
Well, musings was kind of an interesting word that, just meditations, things like that. And it's just basically short chapters that I experienced along the way, mostly since the start of the pandemic of last year. That's when I kind of crystallized things. So it's short chapters, and I'm a traveler on this earth, and I am headed home.
Now, speaking of how to read the book, many times authors have a kind of a predetermined way or a suggested way of reading the book, and that's how they set the book up. Do you suggest that your readers read it straight through from cover to cover? Should they take it chapter by chapter, or read it more like a devotional? What's your suggestion there?
Well, it is a devotional of sorts, but each chapter is a standalone chapter. You can start with chapter 13 and then go to 10 or whatever. They all have, their own thoughts. They do interconnect with each chapter, but basically, if a person, I think they need to pray first. It's like I tell people when they read the Bible, they need to basically ask God's help, and then just open it anywhere, and then start reading, and then ask God to help them, and then when He stops them, He's talking to them personally. So the author of the Bible, the King of Kings, basically needs to adjust and direct a person, so that's what I recommend.
Absolutely. I can understand that. That is a great suggestion. Now, when you were putting all of the writings together and, really arranging it, did you have a particular inspiration or particular reason as to why you thought that this book was appropriate for now?
Well, I think the best way to answer that, is it okay if I just go into the chapter titles? Because that's going to be the easiest way for me.
Sure.
Okay. The first title, the chapter title, is basically chapter 0, and it's what happened after going home. And it's just a timeline. The first chapter is flies and bedbugs and gnats. Oh my! And I went into murder versus killing. Chapter 2 is moles, and I talk about natural and spiritual moles. Chapter 3 is living in a coronavirus world, and I basically just began to give some thoughts on that regarding how to get outside the box. Chapter 4 is between the church lines, so I looked at pseudo-anointing versus God's anointing. Chapter 5, are you really joking? I basically went into a particular theme where I went to a movie and won't between the lines. I don't know if a person will be able to figure out the movie, but maybe. Chapter 6, the little kid inside of me talks about the trauma I went through as a little kid and stuffed it and kind of how I processed that a little bit. Chapter 7, I go into dreams, false ones, and some that I had. Chapter 8, guarding the van of toxic waste. I went into toxicity, natural and spiritual. And then the next chapter is It's Not the Same. And I basically just began to talk about plumb lines and various things. Chapter 10 is on golf, which I'll kind of leave it at that. Chapter 11, here she is, the curious banana. It's my daughter Hannah. Wrote a few things about her. Chapter 12, God does heal cars, sometimes. I gave a few testimonies, actually about 2 of them, about how he actually took care of my car and how to balance that. Chapter 13, what happened next, was actually what happened when I was converted. 5 years later, I was essentially felt abandoned by God, and the process I had to go through the pain to learn to be closer to him. Chapter 14 was on death. Jesus spoke of 2 kinds of death in John 21 to Peter, and so I went into that. Chapter 15, anger simplified. That's one of my nemesis, and I basically talked about that. Chapter 16, empty calories. I talked basically about people, how they eat all kinds of sweets, and then they go to health clubs trying to get rid of that, and other types of things. Chapter 17, I talked about Dopplering, basically the Doppler effect, and I talked about a particular story that shows how to think and not what to think. Only a few more chapters. Chapter 18, the weather report, talking about meteorologists and kind of how they deal with things and how we idolize the weather report. I went into a cheap motel in chapter 19, meaning I lost my daughter and finally found her, and some of the things that came out of that. And then the next chapter has to do with it's your birthday. So I talk about different birthdays and things like that. Chapter 21, old people have time for everyone. And I began to talk about how old people are neglected, but basically we need to pay attention. Then chapter 22, the doubting of Thomas. I don't like the title, but I go into that for me, and I go into actually how I saw Thomas. Chapter 23, who I am. And I kind of went into some foundational things. Chapter 24 of 26 is very short, called Finally. Chapter 25, I went to porn is boring. And started out with saying, before you squawk, please hear me out, and went into addictions and things that trouble us all. Chapter 26 was prophetic appreciation, kind of borrowed from one of the poems from my family line, and chapter 28 was the dedication, which I put at the end, and finally, chapter 29 is entitled The Daw. So that's it.
I love it. I love it. Now, how long did it take for you to put all of those chapters in the book the way that you thought that it would flow best?
Well, writing actually starts with the first rewrite. You put it down with your heart. You just don't worry about punctuation. But I actually talked into an email when I got certain thoughts, and then I would go back and consolidate them, try to put them into thoughts. And of course, the author is his own worst enemy because you keep analyzing it, rewriting, and finally you have to step away from it. You never get it perfect, but you finally have to submit it. So that was kind of the process right there.
I can definitely understand that. Now, there's always that person out there that's going to give you a little gruff. And people say, well, there's a whole lot of books on the shelf out there. Thomas, what makes your book so special? So I'm going to ask that question on behalf of that person. What makes your book stand out from some of the other books, or what makes your book unique?
Well, every book is unique in a qualified way, but Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. There's just a different way to tell it. My book, quite frankly, I can tell you what I think of my book, but it doesn't matter. It matters what the reader thinks. And my book, I try to get people to think spiritually, to get them outside of religion, out of the box, and into looking in their inner person through the Spirit to be able to really try to get at the root of their relationship with God. And I think that's what sets my book apart in a qualified sense.
Thomas, it is time for us to go to break. But before we do, please, can you remind everyone, what is the title of your book? Where can we get a copy? And, of course, how do we follow you online?
Okay. The title is Musings of a Traveler Headed Home, Musings. It's available from the publisher Westbow or Amazon or other places. You can find it in Google. But also the way to get in touch with me is tomashyoung@gmail.com.
All righty, everyone. Now you know where you can get a copy of the book. We'll be back. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Butts-Chester. My guest today is Thomas Young, and we're talking about his book, Musings of a Traveler Headed Home. Now, my next question for you, Thomas, is any difficulty or trials and tribulations, the pros and cons, if you will. For so many people, choosing how they're going to write their book as far as location is concerned or time of day is an issue, all the way up to choosing, do I self-publish or do I use a publishing house? How did you determine what you were going to do?
Okay, well, the core of it was pain, suffering, and crucifixion. That's what he used to draw me closer to him. You're laughing. It's true. That's the only way we grow. So quite frankly, I had a lot of roadblocks. I mean, he would test me, and I would just sit here and, okay, Lord, what do you want? I'm in pain. But I learned to embrace the pain, and then I tried to write from his hand. And hopefully the result will be clear.
And listeners, you guys already know why I'm laughing, right? Because it's the same for everyone. Everyone says when it is something that is your passion, that is your purpose, there are going to be those ups and downs, those pauses, those stops, those moments where it's just like, Lord, you told me to do it. I need your help to continue to move forward. And it just ends up being this very beautiful thing at the end. So, yep, you guys, you can check off another one. If you're going through that, then you know that it is definitely going to be worth the sacrifices. I love it. I love it. Now, as far as the reader of your book is concerned, did you have a particular person or persons in mind? Did you include, for example, like the teenagers that may be in high school, or were you thinking perhaps older than college age? Would it make more sense to someone who is of the Christian faith, or could you have no particular religious affiliation at all?
All of them. My deal is that I used to do radio announcing a long time ago, and what I would pray was, God, have somebody tune in that needs to tune in. So that's what I do with my book. I let him take care of the results. And my thing is that I'm not saying a child could really embrace it, but anybody that's open to God could benefit.
Absolutely, and I really like that because that allows such a wide scope, a broad sweep of people to be able to enjoy your book. I love it. I think that's really, really smart. Now, in the first chapter, you give a list.
Yes.
Was it important to give that list, and how did you determine what you would include in that list?
That's a very, very good question, because my sister actually called me and wondered why I said June 15th, 1983, Pastor Denny. Well, I left it open because what happened was I felt it was important to establish foundations. In other words, I talked about my salvation and then how I met a pastor, what church I was led to, and then deliverance, and then what happened. I mean, it was a bullet-pointed list of various things, and I want a person to think for themselves. I don't want to tell them what to think. I want to help them how to think. So it was basically, I felt, the best way to start the book.
Now, you mentioned a little bit earlier that you have authored some other books. I think that's awesome, and congratulations for having done so. Many of the guests that I have on, this is not their first book or their only book. Without, of course, giving it all away, because listeners, you know what I'm going to tell you, right? You got to buy the book if you want to find out how it ends. But can you tell us a little bit about some of the other resources and books that are available from you?
Well, the first one was a limited run in 1995. I only had 1,000 printed, and I probably only have about 25 left. It's on poetry. But my second book won first place in the autobiography category from JOAN Press. It has done very well. And so I'm very, very happy with that one. And so this third one kind of goes off that, and I've got in my mind enough for probably 10 more books, but I basically have to make sure I stop my mind from exploding and get my thoughts down properly.
Of course, I can understand. And that was going to be my next question. Do you think that there will be other writings from you? I know many times people will say, I need to, of course, hear from the Lord first as far as when to move on writing another book. But do you have aspirations of getting that all together and prayerfully writing more, or do you think this will be it?
Well, here's how I'll answer that. I hiked the Pacific Coast Trail in 1981, and I got the book published in 2007. It took that long for God to give me the open door. And this particular book, so the point is, if he wants to open the door, then another one will come forth. And I tell him to shut the door if he doesn't want me to do it. So it's up to him. Absolutely. And you guys, you know that I've shared my story with you as well. Sometimes, the answer to your prayer does take time. It took between my asking or requesting in prayer, it took about 5 years for that prayer to come true. But look at where we are now, So absolutely, when the timing is right and God's going to let you know when it is his perfect timing, it will be a beautiful, beautiful end result. So I love it. I love it. Well, just a few more questions for you, Thomas. And the first one is as far as giving advice to someone out there that may be thinking of stepping out. They really want to be an author. They're not quite sure if they go on and stick their toe out there and do it. What are your suggestions to any of our aspiring authors out there? My first thought I will say is everybody has a story to tell, a legacy to leave behind. And so everybody can do a book because, quite frankly, if you just put your thoughts down on paper without punctuation, that's the first step. And I even do editing of books. I'm an English major, and I have helped people to realize things, and I'm willing to help anybody get published if I can. But quite frankly, there's actually, I believe, no excuse for anybody who wants to leave a legacy to not get published, because publishers are actually, you can easily find one. So you can really put things forth in that. So no excuse out there, gang.
Absolutely. I have to agree with you on that. No excuse. excuses. Move forward. I love it. I love it. Well, Thomas Ashley Young, I have enjoyed my conversation with you today on your book, Musings of a Traveler Headed Home. I hope that you have enjoyed your time talking to me as well. But before I let you go, can you please remind everyone of where they can get a copy of the book? And if folks want to reach out to you or just stay in contact with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, first of all, I'll give the contact thing first, and I'll say it at the end, tomashyoung@gmail.com. That's the absolutely best way to get hold of me, and I will get back to whoever emails. But secondly, if you just go to Google and put in Musings of a Traveler Headed Home, by the time you get to the word traveler, it'll auto-populate, and you click on it, it'll come up with my picture on the cover wearing a face shield. So that's the easiest way to get it.
Thank you again for being a guest on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. And listeners, thank you as well for tuning in and spending time with us here. You could have been anywhere, but you chose to spend it with us, and I appreciate that. As always, may the Lord continue to shine his face upon you. May you receive his grace and his mercy in all that you do. Until next time, everyone, remember that you are blessed in the Lord. Have a great day, everyone.